start off by saying hello and welcome. My name is Katie Bartolotta. I am the Policy and Programs Director with Green Building United, one of the organizations that is coordinating this event today, along with the Delaware Sierra Club and the Delaware Energy Services Coalition. So we're all really excited to have you here for our event, Community Solar, How Can Delaware Benefit? And hopefully everyone can see my screen here as I advance along to our next slide. So just for a set of expectations for today, we're going to start with welcome and introduction, move into how can community solar benefit Delaware? Why does Delaware's current community solar law prohibit its proliferation, and what changes are needed to make it effective? Followed by what can Delaware learn from community solar program successes in our region? And we're rounding out then with a long Q&A session. So as folks have questions throughout, please put them into the chat box so you don't forget about them, and we'll be able to pass them over to our facilitator who will ask your questions in live time and have our panelists chime in. And so with that, I want to turn it over to our moderator for today, Bahre van Boekhold. She is a program manager with Applied Energy Group. She is a proud mother, and in her spare time, which she doesn't have a lot of because of the two aforementioned roles she fulfills very successfully, she is the co-chair of our Delaware community of Green Building United and is also part of our board of directors. And in addition to that, she is on the executive board of Green Building United. So she is very busy. We are so grateful to have her helping us today with our moderation of this event. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Bahre.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Bahre. One other thing that we can add about me is that I'm also a Delawarean. I know that it's a hard standard to meet, but I've been here for almost 18 years. Katie, would you please go to the next slide? Perfect. I want to give just a little overview of what Green Building United is. Green Building United is a nonprofit advocacy and education organization that is, our mission is to foster transformative impact in our communities. And we're doing it through, again, education, advocacy, and support. Our vision is a sustainable, healthy, resilient, built environment for all. There is a group of us in Delaware. If you can go to the next slide, there's a group of us in Delaware that create a Delaware community of Green Building United. As you can see, Green Building United at large covers 10 counties, 5 counties in Delaware Valley, 2 in Lehigh, and 3 Delaware counties. Because we wanted to have a group of people that focus very specifically in Delaware, we have a community group in Delaware that we focus very specifically on program, focus on Delaware, on the support and education we need, if it's a policy or advocacy. So our core focus is in Delaware. Can you please go to the next slide? Perfect. From the program that we've been running in the almost last 5-6 years is Pathways to Green School program in collaboration with Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility. That's a program focused on schools. We help them do an energy audit, identify opportunities for SEB, but also educate schools and students and empower them to adapt more sustainable practices as they are learning through them and kids are engaged. We also provide different educational events. You may recall 2 years ago, we had a PACE town hall at Delta Stanton campus, and this is before state adopted the CPACE. So we were able to provide those educational kind of opportunity for everybody to talk about CPACE and learn the value of it. We have also been representing building industry with State of Delaware Climate Action, and we have been participating in their technical work group. So this kind of just a little bit of flavor of what we do in Delaware. So if I go to the next, and I will be facilitating through this process, and just want to kind of level set before we start. We know that clean energy policies are important. We know that it generates clean jobs, it means climate resilience, it means climate action, reducing our emission, cleaner air. And we are here because as Delaware is looking to update its green energy policies and kind of being more aligned with other states around us, it's really important for us to do it in a way which is equitable and accessible to all Delawareans across the economic spectrum. Community solar gets to the core of this equity and accessibility. Not everyone has a PV, I want to say real estate to put a solar panel in their roof. Not everybody has the capital to do that. And that's why community solar is really important. And it's really important for us in Delaware to fix our enabling policy and have this element that ensure equity and accessibility. So with that, I want to introduce our first speaker, Dustin Thompson. He is with Delaware Sierra Club. He is a volunteer and community outreach coordinator. Dustin believes that Delaware can become a leader in the fight for more renewable energy and environmental justice through collaboration and coalition building. And he has been walking that talk. He has been with Delaware Sierra Club for about 2 years, and he had proven himself as a coalition builder and a leader. He had led a coalition that he's going to talk about and spearheaded creating support, awareness, and advocacy for some of key clean energy policy in the Delaware. We have worked with Delaware Sierra Club for the last year and Dustin closely, and it has been a pleasure working with him. With that, Dustin, can you please give us a quick background on the great work you have been doing and working with Coalition, a little bit of context of Delaware renewable energy, and also kind of add how can community solar benefit Delaware? With that, just take it away.
All right. Hopefully I'm not blushing too bad. I appreciate all those kind words. You're too much, too kind. As was said, my name is Dustin Thompson. So I do want to give a little background on the RPS and background on the coalition, what we're advocating for, and why community solar is so important. I mean, it's vitally important for the future of Delaware. Can't stress it enough. So first, what is the RPS? Stands for Renewable Energy Portfolio Standards, for those who are unaware. A lot of states around the country now have RPSs on the books. Ours was created in 2005. Its last update was actually in 2011. We haven't really touched it since then. And what it does is really it helps drive investment for clean energy and has been shown to work with other programs to help reduce regional air pollution, particularly from, of course, the energy sector. It essentially sets a schedule for utilities and requires them to procure a certain percentage year over year from renewable resources. And right now that percentage is capped at 25% by 2025. And as Bahrae had mentioned, a number of states around us and across the country have well surpassed those goals for their future goals. Many states in the past 2 years have came back and revisited their RPSs and increased their percentages. You have Maryland at 50% by 2030, Virginia at 100% by 2050, as well as Washington at 100% by 2045, Oregon 50 at 2040. So we're kind of falling behind. New Jersey's 100% carbon free by 2050. So our 25% by 2025 is certainly one of the lowest in the regions that have RPSs for this long. We did help bring together a coalition of about 38 organizations last year to advocate for expanding the RPS and creating a community solar program in Delaware. Unfortunately, and we've been working on that for a couple of years now, and unfortunately, sometimes the bill comes in a little bit late, or you had this year past, this past session, the coronavirus really did a number on our ability to advocate for the RPS. And of course, the legislators were focused, as they rightly should have been, on ensuring that Delawareans are taken care of during the pandemic. For looking ahead, for 2021, we are advocating that we increase the amount of renewable energy purchased by the utilities in Delaware. We're advocating for 50% by 2035. We have a reasonable timetable to get to that percentage, and that will help keep us in line with other states around the area to help ensure investment comes to Delaware, which again means, of course, green jobs. We want to address an issue with what's called a cost cap, which kind of determines whether or not the renewable marketplace is healthy and viable and not passing on too much cost to ratepayers. Clean energy costs have dramatically decreased over the years, but right now there's some litigation around who controls the cost cap and how is that calculated exactly. So we need to address that. Otherwise, the RPS and the solar market is going to be disrupted again, as it was this past year in 2021. And that's around 500 jobs in Delaware that would be at risk if that does not get taken care of. So that is of a primary importance. We're advocating to move towards what most other states that have an RPS do, which is look at alternative compliance payments. And using that to determine whether the marketplace is healthy and viable, and setting a standard moving forward. We also are advocating once again to create a thriving community solar program for Delaware. Community solar, put simply, is how we are going to really drive the proliferation of solar in the first state. And it's also, and this is vitally important, it's how we're going to get equity in the renewable energy sector in terms of access and benefits. You have right now, nationally speaking, 75% of people can't access or benefit really from solar for a number of reasons Bahrae had mentioned previously. And this is significantly higher for low-income communities. So community solar really opens up a whole new avenue for solar proliferation in Delaware. That's how you're going to access people that rent, who can't, they don't own the roof, so they can't put solar on the roof. Multifamily housing, of course, again, you don't own the infrastructure. We did address HOAs and deed restrictions in legislation a couple years ago, but there's still some holes there, and community solar can help ensure that those individuals have access. You have people like me that have a flat roof, and solar companies are like, we're not touching a flat roof. So there's a lot of old construction as well, particularly in the city of Wilmington, that just without major upgrades, it's not likely that solar is going to be viable there as well. So now you're talking about equity issues as well. And of course, there's upfront costs to solar installations, private solar installation. And so you're essentially squeezing out a lot of people, particularly low and moderate income folks, who can't pay those upfront costs. And community solar really can help address all of these issues. So what we're advocating for is the most equitable and fair community solar program that we can get. A lot of states have community solar already. We're going to hear about the programs that work and how well we can do it here in Delaware by learning from these other states. And that's going to be key, learning from these other states. But we need to make sure that we have requirements that all projects benefit low-income residents of Delaware, that everybody has a fair shake at getting into a community solar program. And that means fair credit standards for programs as well. Early on in community solar, you had some companies that were doing unfair credit standards. You had to have extremely high credits to be able to subscribe to community solar. Now that's not an issue, but we need to make sure that doesn't become an issue here in Delaware as well. And of course, we have grants right now for low-income sustainability and green energy projects. So making sure that we have grants as well for community solar projects. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in the legislation. There are grants that are out there now. We just need to work with, of course, the Sustainable Energy Utility and others to help at DENREC to help make sure those grants are applicable. So moving forward, we got to get this bill moving through the Senate. We're working with some legislators in the Senate to get the bill introduced. We're not entirely sure. It's quite likely that the bill is split between RPS and cost cap, again, because if we don't address that cost cap, we disrupt the renewable marketplace. And then community solar. So what we're hoping to do is to work with partners here in Delaware, expand our coalition beyond the 38 partners that we have now, and get the expertise and experience in these community solar programs from states that have really expanded their projects to have hundreds of megawatts of community solar benefiting a broad range of constituencies and communities. and helping bring that expertise and learn those lessons here in Delaware as we move forward. And we've presented what we feel is strong legislation that does exactly that. It learns this, it's brought in the lessons learned from other states. It's brought in the stakeholders from across this state and our region to really look at how we can do community solar. And I'm really excited to be here today and thank everybody for joining us. I hope you'll join the RPS Coalition's work as we get going in 2021. If you have any questions, never hesitate to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat and I'd be happy to talk with you more. I look forward to answering questions as we get going here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin. We appreciate it. I have seen a couple of our Delaware legislators on the participant list. I didn't get to check everybody, but I would like to thank all of them. I'm going to check and kind of thank them individually, could put them on our chat box. Thank you so much for taking the time and being part of this conversation. I would like to do a transition to our next speaker. And Kate, yes, perfect. Laurel Passera. Laura is the policy director for the Coalition for Community Solar Access, the National Trade Association for business and organization working in the community solar industry. Laura has led Coalition for Community Solar Access efforts in a number of states over the last couple of years, including New Jersey, Maryland, Illinois, New York, Maine. She's also in charge of smaller market that includes Delaware and Rhode Island and other states that are more similar to our market. She also leads the Coalition for Community Solar Access on issues-based work around interconnection, crediting and billing and land use. Laura, we are very happy to have you here on this panel. And can you continue this conversation? We want to hear more. What is in our current community solar law that prohibits building community solar? And what changes are needed to actually make it effective and make it work for Delaware? Please take it from here.
Thank you, Bahar. I appreciate that introduction. So if you could advance to my first slide there, one more again. Just to double down on, I'm sorry, I have dogs and kids in the background. Just to double down on what CCSA is, we are really the only national voice for community solar businesses across the country. We have over 60 members. Those are mostly business members who are developing projects, bringing economic development to states that enable third-party markets. We also have a thriving network of nonprofits, service providers, other companies that work to fill in the gaps, the financing, the legal services, all of the LMI access pieces, all of these other pieces. Community solar truly is a community effort, and it takes a community of businesses and people to make it happen. So that's sort of who we are. We've been around for about 4 years, and you would probably recognize a lot of our members. They're listed on our website. If you want to go check us out there at the bottom there. Just a really quick, in case you are sort of new to community solar, this is sort of the model, the very simplified model of what our members typically engage in. So you start with some enabling legislation that will enable a market to take off. You start with the community solar developer over here, the little contract. They will build, so there's different ways to structure it, but a project developer will build a project. There will be a component of customer acquisition and sign up. The energy from that project goes to the electricity grid. The utility credits those subscribers down at the bottom there on their utility bills, and then the subscribers pay the community solar developer for that offtake unless it's paid for on their utility bill. So that's sort of a quick picture of the sort of circular closed loop of what community solar is. Next slide, please. There's, like I kind of mentioned before, it takes a community. There's a lot of different roles for different parties. In a utility-led model where you've got the utility doing everything, most of the two things in the leftmost columns would be done by the utility. In the third-party model, which is what we work in typically, you've got a lot of these taken off by third-party companies, and that's a mixture of lots of different types of companies: customer acquisition and management, financing, project builders. Lots of different roles there. The utility obviously has a big role in billing and crediting, interconnection, ongoing customer engagement, and then of course the customer always has a role in solar to educate and understand what they're signing. Next slide, please. Just as a high level, I think of the key components are what we really need to focus on in building robust economic drivers for community solar. We need transparency on a lot of levels, and most specifically in utility procedures around interconnection. We need a general set of rules that are consistent, provide a long runway for project development, and allow different business models to flourish. And you'll see those in sort of the retail choice states that allow competition to happen on a lot of different fronts. And then a financeable credit rate. So those are sort of the big pieces to what makes a program viable and will attract a lot of companies to come in and build projects and develop those. And that's sort of what I'm talking about today. I'm going to be, go ahead to the next slide, please. I'm going to be borrowing from some slides that a member of ours had delivered in Delaware at a previous time. So if some of this looks familiar, I'm taking them from Turning Point Energy, but I'm just sort of using them as a springboard to sort of talk about the needs of the market. So there's a lot of, as Dustin mentioned, there's a lot of really strong benefits that accrue at the community level and at the state when you open up a community solar market. You've got a lot of, it's an economic driver. There's a lot of things that need to happen to have a project developed, including local consultants, land acquisition people, financial people, regulatory and attorneys. So typically we've seen that about 50 to 75 jobs are created with one project, and that's usually, you know, a several megawatt project, just to get that project up and off the ground. There's a lot of other things that I probably don't have time to go through, but we have there's a lot of all of that money is it's put into the communities. It's driven through property taxes down to the local level. It's driven through job creation. There's a lot of different benefits that accrue. We'll leave it at that. Next slide, please. So there's a few challenges. The way the rules are written, Delaware has some unique language in their statutes that has sort of prevented community solar from taking off. We're going to get to some of that, but a lot of that is due to the way things are called and the requirements that they be like hyperlocal projects. And so we're going to go through a few of the main challenges, and with that I'm going to talk about sort of those original needs to have transparency and sort of long runway. Next slide, please. So a program structure, we typically have a lot of best practices, which I'll get to a resource at the end of the presentation on that. But project maturity requirements are important, which means that you really want to see that a project is completely viable before it can sign up customers. And so you have to have, like, there are several different points during the project at which it can fail. And those are typically out of the developer's hands. Like permitting doesn't go through. They get to a point in the study and they find that there's an endangered species on the land and they have to pull back, or, there's so many different ways. Financing can fall through because of a rule change. Who knows? So you want to make sure that these projects have passed a certain threshold before you sign up customers, because you don't want to disappoint those customers later and say that we couldn't build this project. You also don't want to have a risky set of circumstances where the project could fail in the first place or riskier than necessary. So in Delaware, it currently requires projects to sign up customers before qualifying as a community project, as opposed to having sort of these typical tenets of site control and interconnection in place, which is what we typically recommend. And so that's pretty risky for developers to want to engage in. Sorry, was there a problem? I got muted.
You're back now.
Oh, where did I drop off? I'm sorry.
You just missed a couple of words. I heard you right up until basically you came back in.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Okay, I just got a notice that the host muted me, so I wasn't sure why. I didn't know if there was background noise. Anyway, so we can go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Customer participation. This is a big one. Typically, we recommend that customers across a utility service territory be able to participate in a project, because the customers don't often match up in geographic territories as to where a good project can be sited. So you can have, typically a lot of projects are sited on a farmer's piece of land that's been carved off. Maybe that's less productive land, or it benefits the farmer's economic development portfolio to host a solar array, but there's no load out there, or there's no customers out there to benefit from that. And I think that Delaware has a pretty restrictive requirement that the customers be near where it's sited. Projects in urban areas can work, but they are often much more expensive. Urban areas don't tend to have the same amount of land to site on, and they typically are just much more expensive for a number of reasons. So we typically see a lot of projects being sited in rural areas and then benefiting the customers in more urban areas. And that also leads to a much bigger value for those customers. They get a better value for their contribution to the project. Next slide, please. Economies of scale is something that's probably a little subjective, but projects are expensive to build, and there's a lot of different moving pieces, as we've talked about. Customer acquisition, attrition, customers that drop out of projects need to be managed on an ongoing basis. And the interconnection is a big one. Like, that's one of the biggest, riskiest pieces of project development. And so those interconnection for a 2 megawatt project and a 5 megawatt projects are about the same. So if you can increase your project size to, usually we see most economies of scale happening around 5 megawatts. If you can increase the project size cap, you'll see a lot more value going to those customers, and you'll see a lot more interest in economic development in the state from companies, because that just means that they can typically finance the projects for a lower credit rate, and it also saves everyone money. And so right now, I think the project size is limited to 2 megawatts, which isn't a deal killer, but it's harder. We'll just put it that way. Next slide, please. So those, I think, are the biggest pieces, but again, I think it's helpful to go back to those sort of core values that apply to a lot of businesses everywhere. We need a less risky environment. We need transparency. We need cooperation from all of the parties to make this happen. So really, when thinking through legislation, it's helpful to think through those. What do we need to do to build a vibrant market that's effective, that's well regulated? I mean, we are very clear that customer protection is an important piece of what we do. We have long-term relationships with customers, and we don't want to risk losing them. So customer protection is built into what we do. And so, we just need to think about that from a holistic perspective. Like, what can we pull from different states to make the legislation work? And we have a lot of great components all over the country that we can pull in. And I've been involved in most of the states all over the country, and happy to answer further questions on that. But if you can go to just the last slide, I think there's one more maybe. Just wanted to drop in a quick picture of our community solar policy decision matrix, which was developed through the help of our member companies to really go through the questions that decision makers should be asking when setting up a program. And it gives you several different options and sort of what our best approach is and the justification for why we think that those policy components should be what we're recommending. So it's a really helpful tool, and it goes through customer protection, interconnection, LMI, lots of different things. So I think it's really helpful. We also have model legislation in there. You guys already have legislation, so if you wanted to pull in bits and pieces of things that were helpful, that might be a good place to go to. So that's all I had. I hope I'm on time and not overtime.
Oh, I was talking to my mute button. Thank you so much, Laura. No, it was great. We appreciate your insight. It's great for Delaware to actually get all of these resources and learn from states that are doing a great job. Thank you for being part of our panel. And we anticipate questions coming in for you in the QA section of our presentation. Katie, perfect. Our last presenter on the panel is Pari Kasodia. Pari is an energy policy expert with more than 10 years of experience in clean energy space. Currently, she serves as a Mid-Atlantic Director for Vote Solar, where she advocates for equity-focused solar policy. Pari is the lead architect and advocate for NJ Shine's campaign that calls for both target and funding to increase solar access, solar and storage access for low-income and environmental justice community. In 2018, Pari played an integral role in the creation of community solar pilot projects in New Jersey that we will hear about it very soon under the Clean Energy Act of 2018 in New Jersey. And she was instrumental in providing grassroots advocacy and support for the successful passage of MD Clean Energy Jobs Act of 2019 in Maryland. Pari is quite a star, actually. We're very glad that we have her, and you would know why we put her actually as the last person on the panel, because no one can follow her act. Pari is among Solar 100 thought leaders listed in renewable energy world, and she's listed in renewable energy world Solar 40 under 40 professional and Midwest Energy News 40 under 40 emerging clean energy leaders. She serves as a board member of Maryland, DC, Delaware, Virginia Solar Energy Industry Association, MDVCA, and Women's Council for Energy and Environment, as well as advisory council member of the Maryland Clean Energy Center. Pari, we are so glad that you're here. And we're excited that we are working someone who has been so focused on Mid-Atlantic. So this is great. Can you tell us about your experience in other states and how Delaware can learn from community solar program successes in our region?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you, Bahare, for having me here. Katie, if you can go to the next slide, please. So again, thanks for that elaborate introduction. My name is Pari Kasodia. I serve as the Mid-Atlantic Director for Vote Solar. We are a national solar advocacy organization, and we work both on legislative and regulatory campaigns. And my work is mostly on the legislative campaigns. Next slide. So basically, I want to start off by giving you all a snapshot of what's happening in the Mid-Atlantic region in terms of the community solar programs. So Washington, DC, Maryland, New Jersey, and Virginia all have pretty robust community solar programs. Virginia actually had a program in 2017. They made some major updates this year. So it's somewhat of a new program as well. Washington's community solar program is uncapped. Their project size limit is 5 megawatts. Maryland and New Jersey are pilot programs. So they, the plan is to expand them, but at least for this point, they are pilot programs. So Maryland's program capacity is capped at 196 megawatt, and the project sizes can go up to 2 megawatts. New Jersey is a 3-year pilot program. They started with a 225 megawatt capacity for 3 years. So it was divided 75 megawatts for each year. And so last year, the capacity was capped at 75 megawatts. And given the robust interest from solar developers, they have increased that cap for the second year to 150 megawatts. And the project size there is up to 5 megawatts. Virginia is still working on its program, so we'll know more details next year on how that turns out to be. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, does not have a community solar program yet. It was being considered this year, but it did not clear the committee. So hopefully next year it'll have better luck. But there is a strong coalition in Pennsylvania that's pushing for a community solar program there. So other thing I would note is that, as Justin mentioned earlier, these states that have strong community solar programs also have a very strong renewable portfolio standard. So at least the states here, they have an RPS of 50% by 2030 or better. So you almost need a strong renewable energy market for community solar program to fully work. Next slide. So in my experience of working in community solar programs, mostly in New Jersey, but also Maryland and somewhat Pennsylvania, these are the top topics that come to my mind when you are designing a robust community solar program. And Laurel kind of touched on some of them. So information and transparency, equity and access provisions, program design and project selection, clear siting and interconnection rules, program participation, and consumer protection. So I'll go into details in all of them and draw from how different states are handling these different topics. Next slide. So in terms of information and transparency, all mid-Atlantic states that have a community solar program, except for DC, require their utilities and other entities to provide publicly available data regarding installed and queued capacity in the community solar program. So you want to make sure that the market is equipped with all the relevant information so that they can plan out their next steps on designing more community solar projects. So that itself should be the first priority when you're designing a community solar program. Second, states also provide a list of approved subscriber organizations. Not all states are doing it in the Mid-Atlantic. So New Jersey and Maryland pre-approved their subscriber organizations. New Jersey just updated their website to reflect this information. So basically, this just adds another layer of consumer protection. So consumers can feel more comfortable going in, knowing that the organization that they're working with is pre-vetted by a state entity. The third aspect is list of actual projects and locations for consumers to easily find information. This is something that I have a hard time finding. The states are not very straightforward in making this information available. So it is there, but you really have to dig in and really you have to look for it, and hopefully you'll find it. So making that information seeking as simpler as possible. Next slide. So moving on to equity and access, majority of the states in the Mid-Atlantic have some sort of a low-income carve-out. So if you look at New Jersey has the highest LMI carve-out at 40%, LMI being low to moderate income, and then Maryland and Virginia have a 30% carve-out. I think it's important when designing the policy to differentiate between just low income or low income and moderate income. So if you have LMI programs, then obviously the percent carve-out should be larger. If it's just low income, then possibly the percent carve-out would be lower. DC has taken a different approach. They have set a target under their Solar for All program to reduce the electricity bills by half for 100,000 households by 2030. So their goal is very measurable, and it really positively impacts low-income families. So in addition to the carve-outs, then you can also have funding, so you can incentivize the community solar market. So again, DC's Solar for All program covers the cost of community solar subscription for low-income households. So these households have to submit an application to be able to get this incentive. Maryland also has a residential community solar grant program for both non-LMI and LMI households, but they're at different rates. And they also have a similar program for the commercial sector. Maryland also has a program called Community Solar LMI PPA Incentive Grant Program, PPA standing for Power Purchase Agreements. So this is basically for subscriber organizations who can demonstrate that their terms and conditions to the consumers will result in cost savings over a certain period of time. So you're basically guaranteeing cost savings for low-income households. So you can design incentives or carve-outs in different ways, whatever the needs of the state are. Next slide. So moving to program design and project selection, again, Laurel sort of touched on that. If you have a competitive market, you want to make sure there is room for competition. So typically we like to see traditional developers or nonprofits or neighborhood organizations providing community solar programs. At least Vote Solar's position is that utilities should be exempt from providing community solar, but if they are to, then they should have a specific purpose, like serving low-income customers, for example. Community solar programs can also be designed with certain policy goals. So for example, in Maryland, there is a carve-out for projects that are sited in brownfields. So you can tie to economic development targets to utilize underutilized or undesirable lands. You can also have local job creation requirements, and then you can also have provisions for low-income households that we just talked about, but also multifamily housing and other disadvantaged communities. So Bahar talked about our New Jersey Shines campaign in New Jersey. That's what we are trying to do. We are basically saying you have a community solar program and you have a low-income target, but let's make sure that that effort results in actual cost savings for low-income households. And there are other benefits that are created when you add storage and energy efficiency to it. And then in terms of project selection, so project selection can be structured as first come, first serve, or go through a competitive solicitation process. So for example, in the state of New Jersey that has pretty robust LMI carve-out, they are utilizing a competitive process. And that has its advantages if you have a community solar program with multiple policy priorities. So it allows you to compare projects side by side and pick the project that meets the most of the criteria laid out by the state. Next slide. So moving on to siting and interconnection rules. So as our state is developing a community solar program, it's also very crucial to provide guidance to local governments on siting and the permitting process. I don't know if any of you are following the Maryland market, but a number of counties in Maryland have imposed moratoriums on community solar development. And so that prompted Governor Hogan to establish a task force on renewable energy development and siting. So it's very important that a state addresses some of these things that will come up once the project is available. New Jersey held webinars with various stakeholders, including the county's association, on the community solar program. So that education and outreach piece should move simultaneously as you are working on getting a legislation passed. New Jersey goes a step further, and I'm not sure if other states do too, but I'll give an example of New Jersey. So New Jersey actually allocated their annual capacity limit by utility jurisdiction to ensure geographic spread of the projects and to ensure that every population had access to a community solar project. So you don't want to be in a position where you have cluster of community solar projects in one location when the needs or the majority of the population is located somewhere else. So you want to balance the geography with where the people are living. And then you can also add specific language, again, tying back to the public policy goals. So New Jersey has specific language that prohibits community solar in preserved lands. New Jersey is land constrained. They have very limited green space. So in that context, it made sense to have this kind of language, but that may not be true for other states. So just doing the internal assessment of the state itself. Next slide, please. So moving on to program participation, I think this goes without saying. The more simpler you can make your enrollment process, the more consumers you will have benefiting from community solar projects. So if a state already has low-income households that participate in other low-income programs, there's really no reason to create a new system to qualify. A state should be able to use those existing programs to qualify consumers. And then providing consumers with disclosure forms that has standardized language. Both Maryland and New Jersey do that. And then also ensuring that consumers can participate in any community solar program as long as it's within the local utilities service district. So consumers shouldn't have to feel like they have to pick one program over the other. They should have flexibility on what they choose. And then making sure that consumers can be acquired at any point, that there's no requirement to sign up consumers before the construction of the project. So giving flexibility there as well. Next slide. So I think consumer protection, I already talked about pre-approving subscriber organizations, also ensuring that the bill language extends the, all sorts of consumer protection laws to community solar projects as well. Also that there's simple exit clauses for customers, especially if they are changing locations or if they're moving out of a jurisdiction where there's no community solar project, that they have flexibility on how they can exit from a contract. Maybe imposing penalties for false or misleading claims or promises made by developers. New Jersey has language in it, but it does not go far enough. So at least from a consumer perspective, you want to make sure that consumers are protected and they are not misled into thinking that they will get a certain level of benefits and then they don't realize those energy benefits. Next slide. So I think this might be my last slide of text. So this goes to the point of what happens when the bill is passed. So you have a bill passed and then you're moving to the rulemaking process. You have to make sure that you're balancing the timeline to release the program rules with the ability for all stakeholders to provide their thoughts. And I'll give Maryland and New Jersey as contrasting examples. So Maryland's timeline was not as aggressive as New Jersey. And so it took a number of years for the program to fully become online. New Jersey, on the other hand, had a very aggressive timeline. They had to put out the rules within 1 year time frame or less. And then in that process, they got it done, but there were a lot of low-income and environmental justice advocates who felt that they didn't have ample opportunities to provide feedback or share their thoughts on how the program should be designed. So balancing the aggressiveness of launching the program with making sure all stakeholders have the space and the time to participate is important. Next one, just like education and outreach provisions. Oops, sorry. So this goes back to my original point that as you are pushing for community solar, you have to also educate the consumers. We did a survey in New Jersey a few months back, and we asked New Jersey residents if they're aware of the community solar program in their state, and 10% said that they are aware of it. This is 2 years into the program, and only a very small percent of New Jerseyans knew about the program. So, that just goes to show how much education and awareness is needed to really make a program work. And then there should be opportunities for updating program rules in the future. As we all know, markets change. We learn new things every time we run a program. So what are the opportunities for updating the program rules, and what's the framework to do so? So noting that either in the rulemaking process or in the legislative bill itself is important. So I think this is my last slide. So happy to answer any questions. I just saw Justin's comment on coalition building. I think that's extremely important because you want to make sure you have a wide variety of stakeholders whose input has been given consideration when you're pushing for legislation. So I'll stop there. Thank you all for listening.
Sure. Thank you, Perry. We really appreciate your insight and input. I want to encourage everybody to please put your questions on the chat box so we can share it with our panelists. But I forgot actually that we have another star on our panelists, and I forgot about it. It's a local star. It's Dale Davis. He is quite known in Delaware, and he is the president of CMI Solar and Electric. He's also president of Delaware Solar Energy Coalition. He is on our panel answering questions, providing a Delaware perspective. So yes, that's our final act and our best act, having Dale on our panel. So everybody, I'm looking at seeing if we have any question. Yes, I see one coming. We have Yap Taminuya from University of Delaware Center for Energy and Environmental Policy. He's asking the panel regarding the community component in community solar. Currently, it seems that community essentially means everyone that signed up on the developer subscription list. Last year, SB Senate Bill 250 spent considerable time defining the community by creating authorities that can represent local communities. I did not hear much about this during the representation. What are the panelists' thoughts on this? And thank you. I actually appreciate this point. There was a lot of kind of back and forth on this kind of concept of community and how we can get there, and do we need to create a new authority, and what we should do to get that community happening last year when Sustainable Bill 250 passed. And I will want to open that to our panelists, Perry, Laurel, and Dustin, to kind of get in that. We kind of want everybody to kind of know that even though other states across the nation have not created a new authority, they are getting to that essence of community. In Colorado, actually, native communities and all of our, now I can't think of our tribes, are creating their own generation and community solar. So we kind of don't need to create a community organization to have a community solar. But I will let Perry, Dustin, and Laura to take that one. Do I need to?
I'll jump in.
Sure.
So thanks for that question. It's really at the core of what we presented to the legislature this year is respecting what was laid forth in Senate Bill 250 while providing the best of both worlds, essentially. You do have a situation in which you are under the original SB 250 last year, you're requiring that everybody go through this authority process, even if they don't necessarily need to. Other states have shown that you don't have to create authority if you already have access to capital. If you already have a legal entity, right, a business or a company or a community solar company that's willing to create a project, you don't need the bond rating of the municipality or a county in order to create a project. You can just allow the regulations and put the right regulations and rules in place to make sure that you have the protections and the process necessary to create a project. However, there was a vision set forth in SB 250 that essentially wanted to allow communities to come together, civic groups, people that don't have a legal entity or access to capital, to create a project that they own. They own directly the credits, the renewable energy credits. They own directly the project and all the good and bad that comes with that. The headache of dealing with regulators and that sort of thing. But to work with the municipality or county to create a project that they own and that represents their interest. Now, you're probably talking about a pretty small percentage of people when you're talking about going through this process, because it's quite involved. I mean, it's no small feat to go through the process that was laid out in SB 250. However, there's probably communities out there that want to do that, and we should have something enabling them to do so and a process by which they can do that. But the vast majority of people want solar, they want community solar, and they want the least headache possible to get there. And in most states, that's what you get. You get subscriber services where you can just subscribe to a project that's already being created by a company that does community solar, or another community such as a house of worship, or nonprofit agency, or a housing authority, or something along those lines. You can just subscribe to the project that's already being created. You don't have to deal with the auctions and the recs and the regulators and all that sort of stuff. So we did both in what we're presenting this coming 2021.
I'll just second a couple of those points. We obviously see a lot of interest in every state we work in from community groups wanting to participate in community solar, and a good statute should enable church groups, to tribes, to whomever to do that, as well as big companies. I will just say that we have seen a lot of interest, but the feasibility is it's very difficult for these groups to actually go through the incredibly complex steps of creating the structure, getting the financing, understanding the interconnection process. It takes a full-time or more job for people to do this, and a lot of people just don't have that kind of time or energy to put into it. So that's where it's helpful for the companies to step in, and they've got the models, they have the regulatory attorneys, they can do it much quicker for much cheaper. But there obviously should be an option for people that, for groups that want to do it themselves and have something in their neighborhood to point to say, this is our community solar facility and we built this, so I'll just say that it's just incredibly difficult to do. It happens, but it's just very hard.
Yeah, I'll add, I totally agree with what Laurel and Dustin said. I'll add my thoughts to it. I think it is very difficult, but I think as a state entity or state legislative body, if you really tie it to your other policy goals like economic development, then maybe you can provide resources. It could be financial resources or technical assistance that educates church owners or neighborhood associations to really figure out how to set a small scale community solar project. So this does not have to be 2 megawatt or bigger. It could be a much smaller project. I'll just share an example of this entity. It's the Shiloh Temple in Minneapolis that partnered with one of the solar developers, and they put the community solar project on the roof of the temple. And they also had local hiring requirements, and then it was powering the community members. So it was just a very neat structure of designing community solar projects that are truly community owned. So there are also opportunities for private entities to partner with local neighborhood-based groups. So that is something that the state entity can enable and encourage.
Thank you. We have a question from Michael Soika. It says, while I realize the participation fee is not uniform to the number of participants in each community solar project and the varying infrastructure requirements, do we know the average participation fee in places who have implemented community solar per participant?
I think it's more, if you don't mind me taking that, I think it's easier to think about bill savings rather than the fee, because if you're looking at a customer, a community solar contract that over the span of 25 years, you're going to look at a really high fee if you aggregate all of your energy over that time, right? So what it's easier for people to think about is that percentage of bill savings. So if you have if you usually pay $100 for your energy bill every month, and you wanted to maximize your community solar savings, then typically, in a lot of states we see anywhere between a 5 and 20% savings on their bill every month. So you would pay, let's say, at the low end of that, you would pay $95, but you would get $100 in credit. So, you know, we absolutely expect to see bill savings every month. And for low to moderate income participants, that savings percentage is usually higher. In some cases, the state will mandate that it be higher. In Illinois, for example, it's 50% savings that they have to achieve. So I think it's an easier way to look at it in terms of bill savings.
I think this also speaks to the need to have some flexibility in how these programs are developed. You know, the traditional community solar might be more based on how much of the kilowatt hours you pull out of the array. And so you have a bill savings based on what you're paying for that community generated solar is less than you would be paying for it from the utility. But you could also have the type of situation where, say, a church group gets together, develops a system, and then individual members own part of that system. They've got an investment in having it built, and they get that percentage. So there's many different ways to get this done. Some that'll work better than others, but the legislation that looks like it'll be introduced would allow for all those different models, and that's critical that we do that moving forward, including the one that was originally envisioned with the participation of the SCU and the community groups, which could be a fine model once we get through all the details of it.
Thank you. We have another question from Charlie Garlow. What are customers paying less than standard offer service? And Charlie, would you like to unmute to explain more, if I got it correctly, the nuance in the question?
Yes, we just heard a minute ago that savings are typically 5% to 20%. In other words, saving $5 or $20 off of a $100 monthly bill. But I was just wondering if the different states have actual systems in place to say that we will guarantee this will be 7% less if you are a regular customer or 50% less if you're low and moderate income in Maryland versus what's New Jersey doing to make sure that it's less than the regular bill that you might otherwise get. That's the standard offer service. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can just respond briefly. I don't know of any of our developers that operate on a premium product, and that is you pay more than your typical bill savings. Everyone, it's a discount based service, and those contracts can be as varied as a retail supply set of contracts. You can have a fixed discount where you get a fixed amount off every month. You can have a hedged rate where you pay the same amount every month. There's so many different ways to structure a community solar contract. So that's why it's really incumbent upon customers to read carefully, understand the terms, and the state has a really important role to play in setting up like the correct customer disclosure forms so that people can better understand their contracts. And I've never seen a state dictate the savings for mass market or general customers only for low to moderate income, and that's not all the time. So just I would say if they do dictate a percentage savings, it would only be for low income customers. But otherwise, it interferes with competition and the role that different business models can play, attracting different types of customers to sort of dictate those contract terms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if I may add to that, I think Laurel is right. I have not seen a state that would mandate certain level of savings, but both DC and Maryland are incentivizing providers to get to a certain level of savings. So under DC's Solar for All program, they have a pretty clear-cut goal on what the benefits should be to the consumers, and they're incentivizing that, but they're leaving it up to the developer and the subscriber organization on how they achieve that.
Excellent. I have another question from Tom Brett, I believe. I have it as T. Brett. Are there any examples of cities that made investment in community solar where cities managed, processed, and provided electricity directly to customer, eliminating the middleman and lowering costs to customers?
I don't want to be annoying. I can speak to that briefly, though, if you'd like.
Go ahead, Laura. Yeah, you have the real experience. I mean, in Delaware, we are still new. We don't have any project, and there was a lot of conversation about, when you see the framing of middleman, and do we want businesses? Should we have like a very defined way of going after community solar? I think your insight, bringing it from what is happening outside Delaware and what are the success stories are really valuable. So please take it on and share your experience.
I think, yes, there are examples of that. It's mostly been done through municipal aggregation or CCAs to contract with a community solar provider and then do sort of either an opt-in or an opt-out program where their participants can, or their members can participate. It's not a super common model. If community solar is allowed in a state, then people can sort of pick and choose. I think New Jersey is exploring some opportunities with community solar and municipal aggregation. I've heard, I've talked to people in Ohio who are interested in getting around the state's lack of community solar rules by sort of doing it in a sort of roundabout way, like Columbus has been interested in doing it. Cities in Indiana are interested because there's no statewide program. So, there are definitely opportunities and models out there. It's just, it's not as common of a thing, I guess.
Excellent.
Dale, maybe you were going to say something, Dale. Sorry to cut you off. I was going to say that maybe the Wilmington House Authority is sort of an example.
I think probably the city of Newark system over at McKee Park is probably the better example. So they have a rather unique way of doing it over there. They use some of their green energy funds to fund a municipal project, and then allowed municipal residents to purchase essentially panels off of that project for a fixed monthly discount off of their electric bill. So it was it's really the one community solar project example of one model that we have in Delaware. The Wilmington Housing Authority project, what that one does, that's more of an aggregated solar project that benefits the WHA properties. The individual residents don't necessarily participate in that project, other than the fact that the housing authority gets a cheaper rate because the individual residents aren't individually metered. But they have a solar field that they then distribute that power out to their various properties.
Thank you, Dale. And that's a picture actually that we had for our event, the Wilmington Housing Authority. We have a question from Councilwoman D. Durham. My interest in what land use regulations should be implemented to facilitate these at a county level once the state legislature is passed.
So that's interesting. Newcastle County has already implemented that legislation. They a couple years ago authorized the use of farmland for solar up to certain limits in Newcastle County, which is good enabling legislation, because certainly a lot of places where you want to site community solar, there's not a good available land for doing so. Kent and Sussex County haven't specifically legislated in any community solar requirements, although they also haven't put moratoriums on like we've seen over in Maryland.
I think it's at least from my perspective, it's balancing what the state renewable energy goals are versus the different geographic components. If you are land constrained, then that obviously plays a role on where community solar can be sited. So I think a best place would be to start a stakeholder process and just have different stakeholders give input on what's best for that state. But at the end, counties still have their independence, so they should be allowed to have that decision-making authority.
Thank you, Patty and Dale. We have about 15 more minutes in our Q&A section. I would like to open it up to people. If you want to open your speaker and ask a question yourself, please feel free to do that.
I'll just add on one more thing to the last comment or the last question. It's in the interest of cities and counties and the state to incentivize these projects to be built on brownfields, rooftops, and other places, carports. I would say those are great ideas, but those are also very much more expensive than siting on other types of property, or like land. So if you have that discussion, I would say think about ways to incentivize that participation through additional incentives, credit rates, or the like, because otherwise the projects won't be sited there.
Bahare, there was also a question from Francois about when we can hope to see it, or what the timeline is that we can hope to see for an updated.
Yes.
Legislation.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
Go
ahead.
We're hopeful that the bill is introduced early this session, so we can have these conversations down at the legislature level. So the hope is that it passes this year, and then we have the remainder of the year. What we are proposing in the bill is to have the remainder of the year to convene a stakeholder group to come up with the rules and regs around community solar, to have a lot of the protections that Pari went over in her presentation. So the hope is that by the following year, which 2022, we would have the rules and regs necessary to start looking at project development.
Thank you. We have a question from Beth Chages, and her question is, what does the proposed legislation for Delaware do to support Delaware solar industry and Delaware workers?
I mean, community solar is inherently going to support the Delaware industry because it has to be developed in Delaware. So the projects have to be in the same utility service district. So we're focused here primarily, of course, on Delmarva. With the community solar bill that we presented to the legislature, we actually focus exclusively on Delmarva with the community solar provisions, unless your municipality opts in, passes their own ordinance to go through the authority process that was already there in 250. But there'd be no way to set up one of these other projects as we proposed outside of Delmarva territory. So the project has to be built in Delmarva territory in Delaware. And so you can have contracts with the community solar company, as was mentioned by a previous speaker, where you have workforce requirements. But in general terms, the project needs to be built here. So there is going to be the industry developed here in the state compared to regular solar in the SREC market, where right now you can, Delmarva can comply with the RPS by purchasing credits out of state. So I think that answers the question.
And we also have a provision in Delaware's RPS that there's a 10% adder for SRECs if you use Delaware labor to construct the system. So that would also apply to SRECs being generated by community solar systems as currently written.
Thank you, Dale and Dustin. We have a question from Amy Cornelius. Do we have any idea what the pent-up demand is for developers coming into the state?
I guess I don't really understand the question. Are they saying, like, is there enough demand to bring?
No, I'm just wondering how many developers are waiting to come into the state to build community solar projects? Like in Pennsylvania, that number's been quantified. I didn't know if that number had been quantified in Delaware.
I mean, I work with probably most of them that would come in. Nobody's really paying attention to Delaware right now, I can tell you. I mean, so there are a few companies, but if legislation got passed, people would perk up real quick.
Yeah.
But they haven't seen, you know, a lot of movement in Delaware over the years. So I guess that's
my understanding too, that when it passes, they will all line up. So the interest is there. I think developers are just waiting for the right market conditions to come in.
Yeah, we actually do some construction of those projects in other states where community solar's a little bit more effective. And there's been a couple of the developers who have had a high level of interest in Delaware. But with our current legislative setup for community solar, the projects don't pencil out for them. So they're keeping a finger on it, but until we get some legislation passed to remove some of these issues, we won't see a whole lot of development in Delaware.
And I mean, I can just personally add that there was a point in time that I was looking for a developer to develop a specific project in Delaware. And one of the things that I considered would have been a good candidate for the project was community solar, and couldn't make it happen, obviously. So that's where I end up having sort of a personal interest in seeing the existing legislation doesn't work. And as Laurel and Pari both agree that if we can get this legislation fixed, people will develop products and it will be beneficial economically, jobs for our state.
You need to, oh, okay, I'll just speak. So I absolutely concur, and, you know, mentioned this in other meetings, had projects that didn't work because of the constraints in terms of the regulations and how things were set here. So even people that had money that wanted projects, they just went to New Jersey. It's right across the border, and the project worked. I was like, oh man, this is kind of hurting, but nothing you can do about that. And definitely agree that, like solar across the country, when regulations change, companies are always scouting out and looking at regulations. Believe me, if we get a good program put together, they'll come. I mean, that's how they expand across the country. They literally look for where you're going to have an environment where you can actually do solar. I mean, that's critical. And so if we get this to happen, we'll have a lot of activity.
So we have one question and also a conversation about the academic work that our fellow professors at University of Delaware has been working on. So I want to kind of acknowledge that conversation, and I want to actually say, well, speaking of stars, actually Steve Hegedus is my favorite all-time professor at UD. I took his class and I think he is scoring as my best professor. So he actually noted the paper he published with the lead author, Dr. John Byrne, on the community solar. It's there, the link is there. Thank you, Steve, for putting it there. And Yup from also Center for Energy and Environmental Policy, or it's kind of, what is it? What is the free? It's a non-profit spin-off of SEEP, also added some more information on the study that they did. They look at California and Massachusetts, and I encourage everybody to look at it, and it's there. If there's any specific question on that, please let me know. I know there is a great conversation happening there. I have a question, acknowledging that conversation that's happening on the side panel. I want to ask the question that our representative Paul Baumbach is asking. What are pros and cons of combining the three elements? RPS increase, community solar, and clarification between PSC and DNREC versus running separately? Such a great question.
So
Representative, that is great. So who wants to take that?
I can start. So the benefit is that you're looking at it in a comprehensive way to run them all three at the same time. But again, we got to focus on the immediate needs and kind of balance that situation, that equation. If we don't have this issue resolved with the cost cap, you're going to have a major disruption in the solar market. And again, it's around 500 jobs in Delaware that you're putting at risk. And it's just a dangerous thing to do, to put that many people's livelihoods at risk. And so that's why there's a number of people in the legislature that want to split the bill between RPS, cost cap, and community solar separately. Of course, everybody's open to their own opinion on that, whether we can get all three done at one time in one bill and use it as kind of a package deal, which there are definitely advocates for that, or whether we take what we've been having the conversation on, which is the RPS and the cost cap for now going on 3 years, and everybody's familiar with that, and getting that passed, and then fighting as strongly as possible to get the community solar done as quickly as possible as well, so we have plenty of time to come up with those rules and regs.
The other issue is in SB 250 and still surviving in the current format that we hope to introduce, the subscriber organizations that were envisioned have bonding authority, and that requires a 3/4 majority vote to get passed. So, it's a heavier lift than just a simple majority that we might only need to go for RPS and cost cap correction.
Yeah, just to jump back in. So as I said earlier, we left those authorities in the bill, as Dale just said. But the idea was that that's going to be the small amount of cases. It's going to be the minority of cases that go through that authority process, just because, as others have mentioned, how complex it's going to be inevitably be. The vast majority of cases will be what is being done in other states, being done here in Delaware, which does not require the authorities to be created. So although that's in there, it's prospected to be a much smaller section of the market. And I know that lifted a lot of heartburn for legislators down in Leg Hall and people in the various counties and municipalities as well.
Thank you so much, Dale and Dustin, for clarification. Indeed. We have a last question. I'm getting it from Councilwoman Dorman, and that's for Dale. Dale, so does the Newcastle County Code need to be expanded? If Newcastle County already did it, then why do we need this state legislation?
So the Newcastle County Code that was changed a couple of years ago basically enabled, it was a land use regulation enabling to allow solar to be put on farmland. In previous county code, solar could only be put on industrial lands. So the Newcastle County has now allowed solar, I believe, up to 10,000 acres worth of land in Newcastle County, which is pretty substantial. So that piece of enabling legislation was purely land use requirements and appears to have done the job that it needs to do. The legislation that we're talking about down in Dover is specifically on how community solar works, but it won't really have anything to do with siting concerns, as that's a county by county land use decision.
Yeah, you still need to address the feeder pattern issue, rather than doing feeder patterns, doing it in utility service by utility service district. You still need to adjust the size cap, the cap on the size of the projects to be economical. You still need to deal with the requirements to have all your subscribers ahead of time, which is just completely out of touch with reality. Nobody's going to subscribe to a project when you can't know the details of the project. So looking at the reality of how this marketplace works in every other state, we still have to address the code with how it's dealt with here in Delaware.
Thank you, Dustin and Dale. We are almost out of time, 5:30. Thank you so much for everybody. Thank you for all of our University of Delaware associates that have the conversation, and put the link of the paper on the chat as well. All the representatives and senators that join us. I hope that this town hall and this opportunity to hear from other states and the importance and value of kind of making our enabling policy fixed so we can have it and kind of go about making it equitable and accessible, kind of get that message loud and clear out there. With that, I'm going to close this session. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have all of you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We'll follow up with the slides, the recording, all of the papers that were mentioned. Thanks again to our speakers, Dustin, Laurel, Pari, and for Dale for joining us in the Q&A. And thanks again to Anne and Bahre, who did a really great job organizing this on behalf of the Delaware community of Green Building United. We'll follow up with folks of how to stay in touch with us through various channels as well. And hope we'll see many of you joining the Community Solar Coalition that the Sierra Club is leading on behalf of all of the organizations here today. So thanks everyone, and we will be in touch with you very soon.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.